MH370, a Boeing 777, leaves Kuala Lumpur for Beijing, China. Normal day, normal flight, normal conditions. But this Malaysian Airlines flight never made it to its destination. In fact, it never made it to anywhere. It just vanished. The disappearance of flight MH370 has become a mystery like no other in aviation history, full of cover-ups, shrouded in controversy, and riddled with coincidences that are far too numerous to ignore. But there is evidence that they don't want you to know. Welcome back to Beau Videos and episode 17 in the series, Vanished, Flight MH370. The date is March the 8th, 2014. Malaysian flight MH370 is less than 40 minutes into a journey from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, China over the South China Sea. There are 227 passengers, 10 flight attendants and 2 pilots aboard. It is being tracked by Kuala Lumpur's control tower and is about to be passed to Vietnam's air traffic control. After the pilot radios through a simple and polite "Good night, Kuala Lumpur," it vanishes from radar. Kuala Lumpur doesn't have it, and Vietnam air traffic control cannot see it either. Malaysian military radar track it for another hour, it is revealed during the initial investigation, but it also vanishes from them too. This was to spark the biggest hunt for an aircraft ever conducted and would involve at least 9 countries and thousands of man-hours. But yet, to this day, it was never found. More worryingly, after all the investigations, all the inquiries, the cause of its disappearance has never been determined. The one thing that stands out for me is the number of coincidences that follow this case. Way too many to be ignored. Let's start diving. The flight took off with no reported problems at 12:25 a.m. It starts to reach its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet over the South China Sea. Communications between air traffic control and the pilots are normal. Everything seems standard. Kuala Lumpur radioed through to the captain to notify him that they were about to leave Malaysian airspace and they would be transferring them to Vietnam air traffic control. At the precise moment MH370 enters Vietnamese airspace, the radio signal has vanished and the plane loses all contact with ground controllers. First, they thought maybe the crew had made a handling error or there was a malfunction in the radar system. The part of the South China Sea they were flying across had been notorious for communication problems, so no one as yet was too concerned. At 1:38, air traffic control showed the first signs of concern. They contacted several planes in the area to see if they could be spotted. These planes also had no visual or radio communications with flight MH370. Was it a weather problem? Nope. The weather seemed non-threatening at the time. Despite this, air traffic control supervisors still took this into account. Maybe MH370 had landed on one of the plenty small islands in the South China Sea. But surely if there was an engine fire or something similar, and the pilots had instructed the crew to such emergencies before taking action, some of the passengers would have used their mobile phones to contact loved ones. You see it all the time in air emergencies, when the father rings or texts his wife to tell her he loves her in case he dies. Nothing like this happened. And bear in mind, a lot of the passengers were Chinese, and most Chinese folk have 2 phones. 2,200 miles away, unsuspecting family members were waking up and heading to Beijing Airport to pick up their loved ones. They had no idea what was about to unfold. The plane was due to land at around 6:30 a.m. That morning, the flight display board was showing that flight MH370 from Kuala Lumpur had been delayed. At some time around 10:30 a.m., officials spoke for the first time. What they told the public was not reassuring. They told the waiting families that the flight MH370 had lost contact with all ground controls. What they hadn't told the families is that it had taken authorities 4 hours to react to the missing plane, 4 hours to instigate a search. This is unprecedented to allow a plane to fly for 4 hours without contact or detection. It could be anywhere. It could fly into another aircraft. Why did they allow this? Imagine this happening over the Atlantic or something. Within 5 or 6 minutes of a plane going off course or undetected, jets would be deployed and help escort the plane. If it didn't respond and was heading towards a populated area, they would shoot it down. This 4 hour delay is a definite red flag. Remember, this was post 9/11. Malaysia has ample military jets and large populated cities. The only explanation for this came from the Malaysian Minister of Defence. He astonishingly blamed the lack of importance, as we are not at war with anyone, he said, and it didn't rate as a military emergency. Very strange statement.
What's the point of sending it up? Well, to see it going, you need a fighter for that? We're talking about military procedures. And if I did shoot it down, you'll be the first to say, how can you shoot down a commercial airline with 14 nationals, half of them Chinese?
More than 10 hours after the disappearance of the flight, airport flight display boards still announced that flight MH370 was delayed. Is this incompetence, or does this tell a story? Plus, reporters and photographers were starting to gather, and flash photography of worried and distraught family members and friends were being beamed across the world. It was traumatic, to say the least. An investigation was launched. How can a 350-ton aircraft, equipped with tracking antenna, modern computer systems, and a state-of-the-art transponder, just vanish? The transponder alone gives the plane's exact speed, location, and its altitude. Another piece of important equipment is the ACAR box, or the ACAR box. Without getting too technical, this gives ground control information about temperature, fuel loads, and engine management info. These two vitally important devices were turned off within a minute of each other. Now, the transponder can be turned off easily by the pilot, just a switch on the dashboard, but the ACAR box has to be turned off in the cargo hold. The pilot would need to enter a trap door in the passenger cabin and manually search for the ACAR and turn it off by pulling a fuse, the right fuse. This is not part of the training of a pilot and is an extremely complex procedure. Could this mean the plane crashed at sea? The very next day, on March 9th, a search party was sent out to the South China Sea at the very spot these two devices stopped working. They found no wreckage whatsoever. So maybe the plane continued on its way, which means either or both the pilots would have had to turn both devices off, or, of course, could it be one or more of the passengers? Investigators combed through the passenger manifest, and what they found frightened them. Two names on the list intrigued the investigators: Austrian Christian Kozel and Italian Luigi Maraldi. It was established that these two names never got on board the plane. The authorities found the two men. They explained why they hadn't boarded. Luigi Maraldi had lost his passport, while Christian Kozel had changed his mind. But who were the two passengers sat in their seats 30C and 34C? Airport cameras were scoured, and it was determined that the Austrian and the Italian had been replaced by two stowaways travelling on stolen passports. One was identified as a 19-year-old Iranian, the other was an unidentified Iranian, but it was established that they had both purchased the tickets at the same time. Immediately, these two stowaways were of grave concern. How was it possible, especially after the attacks on 9/11/2001, that two Iranians could pass through international airport security, both with stolen passports? Insiders have determined that with a little money, you can get on a commercial airline at Kuala Lumpur quite easily. So was this a terrorist attack? Had these two stowaways hijacked the plane? And what was their motivations? Folk began to think this was highly creditable, but the authorities quickly dismissed these claims in a press conference. Attention quickly passed to the crew, the two pilots. The pilot in command was 52-year-old Captain Zahiria Shah, a Malaysian national. He had been with Malaysian Airlines since 1981 and was promoted to captain in 1991 and was a captain of the Boeing 777 class aircraft since 1998. In total, he had over 18,000 hours of flying experience and was an expert on this type of aircraft. The co-pilot was in stark contrast. He was 26-year-old First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, and he was still learning the Boeing 777. In fact, this was his last training session before being scheduled to be examined on his next flight. He had only accumulated 2,700 air hours on the Boeing aircraft, mostly as a trainee. Another red flag is that the captain, Amar Shah, had a flight simulator of the exact same Boeing 777 at his home. After investigators examined the simulator, it was established from archived computer data that the captain had tried to land the aircraft on extremely short runways on numerous occasions, succeeding at several attempts. It must be noted, though, that he had never hidden this fact, even posting this on his Facebook page. Was this the first sign, the first evidence that something was amiss with the pilots? The investigation of the co-pilot also dragged up some disturbing secrets. Previously, on a previous flight, the co-pilot Farouk Abdul Hamid had invited a couple of ladies into the cockpit. After flirting with them, he agreed to allow them to stay there the whole duration of the flight, including during takeoff and landing. This was strictly prohibited and totally unprofessional. Another red flag, but enough to suspect him as a terrorist. The flight was due to leave in the early hours of March the 8th. At 10 p.m. on March the 7th, video surveillance cameras showed the two pilots safely passing through the security gates before getting on the plane. There was nothing undue and nothing seemed suspicious. One proposal was that one of the pilots wanted to end his life and used the plane as a means. Believe it or not, this has happened several times in aviation history, but investigators quickly ruled this out as there was no evidence to suggest any change in behaviour on the part of each pilot, no signs of social isolation, nor drug or alcohol abuse. And we are also forgetting the lack of wreckage or any debris. After ruling out the pilots and the two stowaways, attentions turned to MH370's cargo. What was it carrying? In any normal crash investigation, the cargo manifest would be released and determined within 2 or 3 days. It took investigators 7 weeks to obtain the manifest for flight MH370, yet another red flag. So what kind of freight, if any, was in the cargo hold? Several strange details on the list catch the eye. According to the list, among the packages stored in the cargo hold was 2 tons of fresh mangosteen, a tropical fruit very similar to the lychee that Chinese love. The problem is, there are no mangosteen in Malaysia. So was there now red flags on the freight list? Was the freight list accurate? Were they hiding something? If it wasn't mangosteen, what was it? Also on board were over 200 kilograms of lithium batteries. According to the list, these were being charged at the time. Air transportation on passenger airlines is prohibited, and transportation of lithium batteries would determine the cause of an air crash shortly after takeoff in Dubai in 2010, just 4 years previous. The state of the wreckage afterwards was astounding. Hardly anything left of the aircraft. So did lithium batteries explode, ripping a hole in the aircraft's cargo hold, causing depressurization? A possibility, but pilots are trained for depressurization and to avoid asphyxiation. They would have reported it immediately. The search and rescue resources in the China Sea hunting for the MH370 was monumental. Just about 40 ships were deployed and just as many airplanes from 9 different countries. 4 days after MH370 disappeared, Malaysian authorities unearthed some new vital information. It is found that on the night of the disappearance, military radar saw traces of MH370. It was deduced that MH370 had made a left turn and headed back over Malaysia, following the border of Indonesia and Thailand, but not actually penetrating Thailand air traffic control, as if he didn't want to be noticed. It headed out towards the Andaman Islands, and that's when military radar lost sight of it. For the investigators, terrorism headed back to the top of the list because the plane passed 4 extremely important airports. If there was an emergency, it would have landed at one of them. 7 days after the plane had disappeared, it is discovered that the plane had been flying for hours by an Inmarsat satellite. The Inmarsat satellite can read signals from an aircraft, even if the transponder and the ACAR have been disconnected. It can read the aircraft's computers and modem. It is now determined that MH370, after turning left, headed south. This makes the search area colossal. Authorities now announce that flight MH370 has crash-landed somewhere in the middle of the Indian Ocean, west of Perth, Australia. Families, journalists, and the general public are left angry and perplexed by this announcement. The 9 countries involved in the search are now accused of lying, especially by the already traumatized families. In all air crash investigations, parts of the debris are always found. For over a year, no parts of the MH370 had been located. It took 16 long months before any of the MH370 was to be found washed up on a beach in Madagascar, directly opposite the search area. Now, this is where it gets bizarre. Out of the 20-something pieces of debris found, more than half of these were found by one person, Blaine Gibson. Blaine Gibson, some call a modern-day Indiana Jones, but is actually a wealthy American lawyer who happens to have a hobby for finding plane crash debris, happened to be being filmed on a beach in Madagascar when parts of the MH370 started washing up. Amazing. Coincidence or red flag? Meanwhile, the search for MH370 continues. Millions and millions of dollars have been spent with no results. The results from the Inmarsat satellite start becoming a doubt. Once again, terrorism sprang to the top of the pile. It was suggested that because of the airspace around the United States of America being so closely monitored after the 9/11 attacks, that terrorists may try somewhere else less security tightened, like Malaysia. In the Indian Ocean lies an important island that most know nothing about, and certainly don't know it is home to a very important US-UK military base. The island's name is Diego Garcia. So I put to you, was flight MH370 hijacked and directed to the island of Diego Garcia, west of Malaysia, and it was a cover-up? Diego Garcia is the most important air base outside of the USA. It's basically like 10 aircraft carriers with all sorts of warplanes, and it is defended like one also. Lots of defensive maneuvers involving Syria, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, etc. all come from this base. It is the most secret and protected military base in the world. So did the hijacked plane approach only to be intercepted by the US or UK military and shot down? And was it all covered up? Diego Garcia is about 2,000 miles from the Maldives, a group of small tropical islands. Witnesses from one of its South Islands say they saw a large passenger airplane with red and blue stripes flying very low over them on March the 8th. Did it get too close? Surprisingly, America has been very quiet with regards to the disappearance of flight MH370. Is that because they had something to do with it, and they think it's far too complicated to explain how they could shoot down a passenger airliner? It's certainly unlike Obama to keep his mouth shut. He even visited Malaysia during the investigation period, but still no word from him. That is very suspicious. Yet he is not alone in his silence. Authorities from several countries have given up the search and the investigation. Their reason, as stated by the French Air Crash Investigation Board, they state, if the pilots turned off the transponder and the ACAR, then there is nothing much we can do. We cannot investigate with blindness. Yet again, very suspicious. The amount of red flags now is worrying. But there is another possibility that is not talked about in the press. What if a third party was involved? If it wasn't weather that brought down the plane, and it wasn't the cargo or the stowaways or the pilots or the malfunction, what if someone else wanted the plane down? On board flight MH370, that fateful journey, were 20 employees from the American company Freescale. Freescale were developing a new microchip, the KL102, and it had incredible powers. These Chinese employees of Freescale had just applied for a patent. This patent was for a stealth airplane that used this microchip to become undetectable by radar. Well, is that irony, coincidence, or the biggest red flag of all? Two brothers decided to investigate the missing MH370 by themselves, and they think they have discovered the truth and the plane. British film producer Ian Wilson and his brother Jackie thought that maybe the plane had crash-landed in some remote, dense rainforest and took it on themselves to scour the remote forests of Malaysia and nearby by computer. After days of scrolling in their spare time, they suddenly stumbled across something amazing. An object that was obviously a plane deep in the rainforest of Cambodia. The two brothers downed tools and ventured out to the remote jungle. Unfortunately, the terrain was too inaccessible, even for their professional guides, and they had to give up. This footage alone has become a mystery within a mystery. Some have debunked this idea, and the subplot has begun to fade. But is this fading because of yet another cover-up? But the strangest theory of all regarding the disappearance of flight MH370 is the UFO theory. Footage has come to light of 3 balls following the flight and the supposed satellite images showing it. I've looked at this footage, and usually I have a very open mind, but this footage looks so amateur and so fake to me. I'm not ruling it out entirely, but it's not that convincing. Have a look. Tell me what you think. The investigation into the vanishing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 has somewhat ended, at least according to authorities it has. So is it more simple than it's all made out, and the plane has just crashed into the ocean, sank, and was never seen again? Was a pilot to blame, either accidentally or on purpose? Were the 2 stowaways involved somehow? Did a third party wipe out the employees of Freescale? Were hijackers heading to Diego Garcia Island? Or have UFOs got a part to play in all of this? You be the judge. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I know, is it supernatural? Is it really paranormal? Well, if it was UFOs, then yes, it is. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. I much appreciate it. And don't forget, if you're on a flight in the future and the pilot comes out and goes down the hatch asking about the ACAR, run. Oh, you can't, can you? Good luck. See you in the next video.